Welcome to the workflow forms. In previous sessions, we covered the common features shared between the regular forms and workflow forms. This session will focus on the workflow features, mainly node properties and workflow properties. Let's explore the exciting realm. First, we need to get into the edit mode and go to the workflow page. To begin editing the workflow nodes and connections, we must first add new version. In the edit mode, we can see that there are 6 types of nodes: start node, end node, task node, child workflow node, CC node, and plugin node. The start and end nodes are fundamental, automatically included in the workflow, and cannot be deleted. Task nodes are used to represent individual steps within the workflow. Connection lines help you to connect tasks that engage multiple departments. When a child workflow is added, the parent workflow will not proceed until the child workflow is completed. Take the example of sales return. We can set the refund request to the financial department as a parent workflow, and add a child workflow to track order returns. When a refund request is initiated, Jodoo will automatically start the child workflow to track the returned goods. The child workflow will be completed only when the goods are returned to the warehouse, and only after that, the financial department can approve the refund. The CC node is used to send copies of workflow results to relevant members, ensuring transparency and collaboration. Additionally, you can integrate plugins into a plugin node to assist in processing requests. For instance, you can add a plugin node to validate invoices in a reimbursement workflow. Similar to field properties, for individual fields, node properties are unique settings for each node within the workflow. Meanwhile, workflow properties are to the entire workflow, just like form properties. In node properties, you can set up node name, node approval, field permissions, approval comment, node actions, overdue actions, and more. Let's have a look at some key properties. Field permissions of node properties are much like those in field properties. It determines if the approval can view or edit the field. If we take the brief option for the field, we can view them in the notifications in My Tasks. A maximum of 6 fields can be ticked. There are 2 types of approval comments: text and signature. By default, the approval comments are disabled, but you can enable them and set them to be required or not. Keep in mind that the digital signatures are not legally binding. Workflow nodes can be configured with 9 types of node actions, including basic actions like submit, stash, return, transfer, and end. We also have nodes related to printing processes. Suppose we enable submit and print, or stash and print. When we submit or stash the node, it initiates a printing process at the same time. We can enable add approval to allow adding new approvals to review the requests. And we can have batch submit enabled to allow mass workflow submissions. Detailed information about the node actions is available in our Help Center. The data to be submitted can validate data submission. By default, it is set to validate all data, but you can switch it to validate only data that meets specific conditions. If we switch it to data meeting conditions, members will fail to submit data that does not meet the condition. Two proceeding rules are available for workflow forms. One approval submits or all approvals submit. Let's say we have more than one approval and would like to keep the process efficient. We need the process to move on as soon as one of the approvals has made decision. Then we can set the property to proceed to the next node when one approval submits. Another property to prevent the workflow from being delayed is overdue actions. We can set the due time for the node. And if that time is exceeded, the overdue action will be taken to remind the approval, submit the node, or return to the previous or start node. That's all we have for the node properties. Now let's move on to the workflow properties. We have workflow reminder to send notifications to remind approvals about pending tasks. In workflow settings, we can grant member access to workflow details, including workflow history and approval comments. We can allow workflow initiator to expedite the workflow to remind and urge the approval. In addition to overdue actions and workflow reminder, we also have a notification feature to remind the approval to review the tasks. Go to the extension page. In Notifications, click Add Notification to set a notification on specific time or based on a date and time field. For example, if we don't want a piece of equipment to be occupied by a project for too long, we may set up a notification based on the time in field. Let Jodoo send a notification 10 days after a member has signed the equipment in to remind the member to return it promptly. Let's go back to the workflow properties. Workflow withdrawal rules can be set to allow the previous approval to withdraw workflow if the next approval has not processed them. Take an example of a business trip request. If the supervisor initially approves but later realized that the request should be rejected, the supervisor can withdraw the workflow in My Tasks and reject it. The auto-submit rule is disabled by default. If the approval of the current node is the same as the previous one, or the approval has previously processed the workflow, we can enable the auto-submit accordingly. That's all for the workflow forms. In the next session, we will talk about the dashboards. Stay tuned for more exciting features and functionalities. See you there.